"Ma'am, step away from that vehicle now." The words cut through the late afternoon air like a sudden drop in temperature, sharp enough to make nearby conversations falter and heads turn without warning. Officer Daniel Reeves stood beside a black luxury sedan parked along the curb, one hand resting near his belt, the other gesturing firmly toward the sidewalk as if drawing an invisible line no one was meant to cross. In front of him, Evelyn Carter paused mid-step, her fingers tightening slightly around the thin plastic handles of a grocery bag that crinkled softly in the silence. The scent of fresh bread drifted faintly upward, warm and comforting against the cool edge in the officer's voice. She looked at him, not with defiance, not with fear, but with a quiet steadiness that seemed almost out of place in the growing tension. Around them, a small crowd began to gather, drawn by instinct more than curiosity, phones appearing subtly in hands, lenses catching the reflection of the setting sun bouncing off the car's polished surface. The vehicle itself gleamed like it belonged somewhere else, somewhere cleaner, quieter, untouched by suspicion, and yet here it was, anchoring the moment in something heavier than metal and paint. Evelyn shifted her weight slowly, her shoes scraping lightly against the pavement, the sound barely audible beneath the distant hum of traffic and the soft rustle of wind weaving through nearby trees. "I'm just waiting," she said, her voice gentle, almost swallowed by the open space between them. Reeves didn't soften. His posture remained rigid, trained, his eyes scanning her coat, her hands, the grocery bag, as if each detail had to justify itself. "This car isn't yours," he replied, his tone controlled but edged with assumption, as though the conclusion had already been reached long before the question was ever asked. A faint breeze lifted the edge of Evelyn's gray hair, brushing it across her cheek as she blinked once, steady, composed. The sunlight shifted again, catching in the wrinkles of her hands, tracing years of quiet endurance across her skin. Behind her, someone whispered, too low to fully hear, but enough to ripple through the crowd. Like a subtle current. A car door slammed somewhere down the block. A dog barked in the distance. Life continued. But here, in this small pocket of tension, time seemed to tighten, compress, waiting. Evelyn adjusted her grip on the bag, the plastic stretching slightly under the weight inside. She took a slow breath, her chest rising and falling with measured calm, as if she had learned long ago how to stand still in moments like this. Reeves stepped half a pace closer. Not aggressive, not loud, but enough. The space between them narrowed, charged now with something unspoken, something heavier than words. And still, Evelyn did not move. The silence did not break all at once. It stretched, thin and fragile, like glass under pressure. And Evelyn Carter remained exactly where she was, her posture neither defensive nor yielding, simply present, as though the ground beneath her feet held more truth than the voices around her. The grocery bag in her hand shifted slightly as the weight settled, a carton inside pressing softly against the plastic, and she adjusted her grip with slow, careful fingers that had learned patience through years no one here could see. Her eyes moved briefly to the car, not with ownership, not with pride, but with recognition, quiet and certain, before returning to the officer standing in front of her. "I understand what it looks like," she said gently, her voice steady enough to carry but soft enough to avoid confrontation, the kind of tone that did not ask for permission to exist. Reeves exhaled through his nose, a controlled breath that carried more impatience than anger, his gaze narrowing slightly, as if searching for something that would confirm what he already believed. "Then you understand why I am asking you to step away," he replied, his words measured, each one placed carefully, but the distance between them now felt less about space and more about assumption. A car passed slowly behind the growing crowd, its engine humming low, the driver glancing over before continuing on, unwilling to linger but unable to ignore. Someone in the crowd shifted their weight, sneakers scraping lightly against the sidewalk, and a faint murmur rippled. Again, not loud enough to interrupt, but enough to remind everyone that this moment was being witnessed. Evelyn's shoulders rose with a quiet breath and fell just as slowly, her calm not forced, not performed, but rooted in something deeper, something that did not need to prove itself. "I am not trying to cause trouble," she added, her words landing gently in the space between them, not as defense, but as truth. Reeves took another small step forward, closing the gap just enough to assert control without raising his voice, his presence filling the space with authority that had been practiced, repeated, reinforced. His eyes flicked once more to the car, then back to her, as if measuring the distance between appearance and possibility. "Trouble usually says the same thing," he answered, not harsh, but firm, the kind of firmness that did not leave room for interpretation. The sunlight shifted again, dipping lower, casting longer shadows across the pavement, stretching both of them into elongated silhouettes that touched before their real selves did. Evelyn noticed the light without looking at it, the warmth brushing faintly across her cheek, and for a moment, something in her expression softened, not in surrender, but in memory, as though she had stood in places like this before, under different skies, with different voices questioning the same quiet truth. The bag in her hand rustled again as a small breeze passed through, carrying with it the distant scent of cut grass and asphalt still holding the heat of the day. She did not step back. She did not step forward. She simply remained, her presence steady against the shifting tension, as if the moment itself would have to decide what to do with her, because she was no longer moving to fit inside it. The tension did not rise with noise. It deepened with stillness, settling into the space between them like something unseen but undeniable. And Officer Reeves straightened slightly, his posture sharpening as if the quiet itself demanded more control. His radio crackled faintly at his shoulder, a distant voice breaking through for a second before fading again, reminding him of procedure, of structure, of the invisible. Lines he was trained to hold. He adjusted his stance, boots planted firmly against the pavement, and glanced once toward the license plate, then back at Evelyn, his expression tightening not with anger, but with certainty he had not yet questioned. "Do you have identification on you, ma'am?" he asked, the words now more formal, more procedural, as if placing her into a category made the situation easier to resolve. Evelyn blinked once, slow and deliberate, her gaze steady as it met his, and there was no hesitation when she answered. "Yes, I do," she said, her voice calm, her tone unchanged, as if the request itself did not shift the ground beneath her. She did not reach for it immediately. Instead, she let the moment breathe, her hand still resting on the grocery bag, the faint outline of a paper loaf pressing against the plastic like something ordinary trying to exist inside something complicated. Reeves noticed the pause. His jaw shifted slightly, not in frustration, but in interpretation, as though hesitation confirmed more than compliance ever could. "Then I need you to show it to me," he continued, his voice firm but controlled, the kind of firmness that expected movement, expected response, expected alignment with the authority he carried. Behind them, a car slowed again, tires rolling softly over asphalt, and someone in the crowd raised their phone a little higher, the small red recording light reflecting faintly in the glass of the sedan. Evelyn finally moved, but not quickly, not reactively. Her fingers released the grocery bag just enough for it to rest against her leg, and with her free hand, she reached toward the pocket of her coat, the fabric brushing softly against itself with a quiet, almost delicate sound, holding its breath without realizing it. The wind shifted again, carrying a faint chill now as the sun dipped lower, and the shadows stretched further across the ground, blurring the edges of everything into something less defined. Evelyn's fingers found the edge of her wallet, worn but clean, and she began to pull it free, the leather catching slightly against the lining of her coat before sliding out into her hand. She held it gently, not raised, not hidden, simply present between them, as if offering not just identification, but a quiet piece of herself into a moment that had already decided too much before it truly began. The wallet rested in Evelyn's hand like something fragile but certain, its worn edges catching the last traces of sunlight as she held it between them, not extending it forward yet, not pulling it back, simply allowing it to exist in the space that had grown heavier with every passing second. Officer Reeves did not reach for it immediately. Instead, his eyes moved first, scanning the object, then her face, then the car again, as if trying to reconcile pieces that refused to align the way he expected. The crowd behind them had grown quieter now, the earlier murmurs fading into a tense stillness broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the occasional shuffle of feet against concrete. A phone somewhere clicked softly as someone adjusted their grip, capturing a moment that felt too delicate to interrupt, yet too significant to ignore. Evelyn's fingers shifted slightly around the wallet, her grip steady, her posture unchanged, her presence grounded in a calm that did not need permission to remain. "You can take a look," she said gently, her voice even, offering without urgency, without resistance, as if she understood that sometimes truth needed time to be seen. Reeves stepped closer by half a pace, the movement small but deliberate, his hand finally lifting as he reached out and took the wallet from her, his fingers brushing lightly against the leather before pulling it toward himself. The contact was brief, almost mechanical, but it carried the weight of the entire moment. He opened it with practiced efficiency, flipping it just enough to reveal the identification inside, his eyes dropping to read. The sunlight shifted again, casting a narrow band of gold across the surface of the card, making the printed letters momentarily harder to distinguish, and he angled it slightly, adjusting to see more clearly. Evelyn watched him, not anxiously, not expectantly, but with a quiet patience that seemed to stretch beyond the moment itself, as though she had learned long ago that being understood was rarely immediate. Reeves's brow tightened slightly as he read, his gaze moving across the details, then back again, slower this time, more deliberate, as if something he saw did not fully match what he had already decided. The crowd leaned in without moving, attention sharpening, silence deepening. A faint breeze passed through, lifting a corner of Evelyn's coat and carrying with it the soft scent of bread still tucked inside the grocery bag at her side. Reeves closed the wallet halfway, not snapping it shut, just pausing, his thumb resting against the edge as his eyes lifted from the card to her face again. There was a shift there, subtle but real, not yet understanding, not yet acknowledgement, but the first small crack in certainty. "Evelyn Carter," he said, repeating the name under his breath as if testing it, placing it against the situation, trying to see where it fit. Evelyn gave the slightest nod, not affirming herself, but affirming the truth that had always been there. The car behind them remained still, silent, its polished surface reflecting the scene back in fragments, distorted by angle and light, as if even the reflection could not fully capture what was unfolding. Reeves inhaled slowly, the air filling his chest, and for a brief second, his posture softened, not enough to change the moment, but enough to suggest that something inside it had begun to shift. The name lingered in the air longer than expected, as if it carried more weight than the simple arrangement of letters on a card, and Officer Reeves held the wallet just a second too long before shifting it in his hand, his grip tightening slightly, not out of aggression, but uncertainty he had not prepared for. His eyes dropped again to the identification, tracing the address, the date, the details that should have clarified everything but somehow did not settle the question that had already taken shape in his mind. The crowd remained still, their attention fixed, the silence now thicker, more aware, as though everyone present could feel that something important had been missed before it even began. Evelyn stood quietly, her hands now resting at her sides, the grocery bag leaning gently against her leg, the faint outline of its contents pressing softly through the plastic like reminders of a life that continued beyond this moment. She did not rush him. She did not speak again. Her patience was not passive, it was deliberate, rooted in the understanding that explanations often arrived after judgment, not before. Reeves cleared his throat softly, the sound small but noticeable in the quiet, and shifted his weight from one foot to the other, the subtle movement breaking the rigid posture he had held since the beginning. "This address," he said, his voice no longer as sharp, but still searching, still trying to place what he was seeing into something that made sense to him. "It is not around here." The statement hung between them, not quite an accusation, not quite a question, but something in between, shaped more by doubt than certainty. Evelyn's gaze followed his words, not defensively, but with a calm acknowledgement of the obvious. "No, it is not," she replied gently, her tone steady, unhurried, as if distance itself was not something that needed justification. A faint ripple moved through the crowd again, a whisper here, a shift there, the subtle signs of people trying to interpret what they were witnessing without fully understanding it. Reeves glanced once more at the car, its polished surface reflecting fragments of sky and movement, and then back at her, his brows drawing together slightly as the gap between appearance and explanation widened rather than closed. "Then why are you here?" he asked, this time more directly, though the firmness in his voice had softened, replaced by something less certain, something that had begun to question itself. Evelyn took a slow breath, the air filling her chest and leaving just as steadily, her composure unchanged, her presence grounded. "I told you," she said, her voice carrying just enough to be heard clearly. "I am waiting for my son." The words settled into the space with a quiet finality, simple, unembellished, and yet they shifted something again, subtle but undeniable. Reeves looked at her for a moment longer, as if measuring the truth in her expression, searching for something that would confirm or deny what she had said, but finding only the same calm he had seen from the beginning. The sunlight dipped lower, casting a deeper amber glow across the scene, and the shadows stretched further, blending the edges of everything into something less defined, less certain. The moment did not resolve. It tightened. It waited. The air seemed to settle into a quiet that pressed gently against everything, not heavy enough to suffocate, but steady enough to slow every movement, every thought, every breath, and Evelyn Carter stood within it, as if she had known this kind of silence before, the kind that arrives when words are no longer enough to carry what is being felt. The grocery bag at her side shifted slightly as the wind moved again, the thin plastic brushing softly against her coat, a small, ordinary sound that felt almost out of place against the stillness surrounding them. Officer Reeves remained in front of her, the wallet still in his hand, but no longer held with the same certainty, his grip loosening just enough to suggest that something inside him had begun to reconsider what he thought he understood. He glanced down at it once more, then back at her, and for a brief moment, his eyes did not search for contradiction or confirmation. They simply rested, as if unsure what to look for next. The crowd behind them had quieted completely now, the earlier whispers gone, replaced by a kind of collective pause, as though everyone present was waiting for something to shift, something to resolve, something to explain why this moment felt heavier than it should. A car door closed somewhere across the street, the sound echoing faintly, and a breeze carried with it the distant scent of pavement cooling under the fading sun. Evelyn adjusted her stance just slightly, not stepping away, not stepping closer, simply easing her weight from one foot to the other, a small, human movement that spoke of time passing, of patience, of presence. Her eyes drifted briefly past Reeves, toward the far end of the street, not searching, not anxious, but aware, as if she was measuring something unseen, something that had not yet arrived, but was already part of the moment. Reeves followed that glance without realizing it, his head turning just enough to look down the street as well, his attention pulled by instinct rather than intention. Nothing obvious stood out. Just a quiet stretch of road, lined with parked cars, trees casting long shadows across the sidewalk, the world continuing in its usual rhythm beyond the small circle they occupied. He turned back to her, his expression softer now, not fully changed, but no longer fixed in the same rigid certainty. The wallet remained open in his hand, the identification still visible, the name still clear, but the meaning behind it no longer felt as simple as it had a few moments ago. Evelyn's gaze returned to him, calm, steady, her presence unchanged, and for a second, neither of them spoke. The silence did not demand to be filled. It existed on its own, complete, holding both of them in a space where assumptions had begun to loosen, even if only slightly. Somewhere in the distance, a car engine approached, low and steady, growing just enough to be noticed, but not yet enough to interrupt. Evelyn did not react to the sound. She did not turn. She simply stood, as if she already knew what was coming and did not need to confirm it. Reeves, however, shifted again, his attention flickering toward the sound, his posture tightening just a fraction, as though the moment was preparing to change, and he was not yet ready to follow it. The light dipped lower, the gold fading into a softer amber, and the edges of everything blurred just enough to make the scene feel suspended between what had been and what was about to unfold. The low hum of the approaching engine grew clearer, rolling steadily down the street until it slipped into the edges of the moment like a quiet interruption that no one could ignore anymore, and Officer Reeves turned his head just slightly, His attention pulled in that direction as the vehicle came into view, dark, clean, deliberate in its movement before easing to a smooth stop just a few feet behind the black sedan. The engine idled for a second, a soft vibration beneath the quiet, and then the driver's door opened with a muted click that seemed louder than it should have been. A man stepped out, his shoes meeting the pavement with controlled precision, his posture straight, his presence composed in a way that did not need to announce itself. Marcus Carter did not rush. He closed the car door gently behind him, the sound solid but measured, and for a brief moment, he simply stood there, his gaze taking in the scene before him, the officer, the crowd, the car, and finally, his mother. Evelyn did not turn immediately. She did not need to. The faintest shift in her expression, almost imperceptible, passed across her face. Not relief, not surprise, but recognition, as if something expected had finally arrived exactly when it was meant to. Reeves straightened again, instinctively adjusting his stance, the wallet still in his hand, his focus shifting fully now to the man approaching. Marcus began to walk forward, each step even, unhurried, his eyes steady, his presence calm but unmistakable, drawing a subtle shift in the air around them. The crowd parted just slightly without being asked, creating space not out of fear, but out of awareness, as if something about him required room to exist. He stopped a few feet from Reeves, close enough to be part of the moment, far enough to keep it measured. For a second, no one spoke. The silence returned, but it was different now, shaped by something new, something that had not been there before. Marcus's gaze moved briefly to Evelyn, softening just enough to acknowledge her, before returning to Reeves, steady, composed, his voice low but clear when he finally spoke. "Officer," he said, not as a challenge, not as a question, but as a statement that carried its own weight. Reeves blinked once, the shift in tone catching him slightly off guard, his grip tightening around the wallet before he seemed to realize it and loosened it again. "Sir, I am handling a situation," he replied, his voice measured, but no longer as certain as it had been moments ago. Marcus took one small step closer, not aggressive, not confrontational, simply present, and his eyes did not leave the officer's. "Yes," he said quietly, "I can see that." The words settled into the space with a calm authority that did not need to rise in volume to be felt. Reeves hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, before extending the wallet slightly, as if unsure whether to return it or hold on to it. Marcus's gaze dropped briefly to the identification still visible inside, then lifted again, and in that moment, something shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to change the direction of everything that followed. The air felt different now, not tense, not calm, but aware, as if the truth that had been waiting quietly all along had finally stepped into the light. Officer Reeves felt the shift before he fully understood it, the kind that does not come from raised voices or sudden movement, but from the quiet certainty in another person's presence. And Marcus Carter stood there with a calm that did not need explanation, his posture relaxed yet grounded, his gaze steady in a way that made everything else feel less certain. Reeves glanced down once more at the identification in his hand, then back at Marcus, and for the first time, the pieces began to align in a way that unsettled him. "This is your vehicle," Reeves said slowly, the statement no longer edged with doubt but shaped by realization, his voice lowering as if the air itself demanded more care. Marcus did not answer immediately. He stepped closer to Evelyn instead, his movement deliberate, and gently reached for the grocery bag resting against her leg, lifting it just enough to ease the weight from her hand before setting it securely in his own. The simple act carried more meaning than anything spoken so far. Evelyn's fingers relaxed, the tension leaving them without announcement, and she looked at him with a quiet warmth that did not need words. Then Marcus turned back to Reeves, his expression unchanged, composed, but no longer neutral. "Yes," he said, his voice even, controlled, "and that is my mother." The words settled into the space with a clarity that left no room for interpretation, and the silence that followed felt different, no longer waiting, but understanding. Reeves's posture shifted, subtle but undeniable, his shoulders lowering just slightly as the certainty he had held began to dissolve. He closed the wallet carefully and extended it back toward Evelyn, his hand steady but slower now, more deliberate, as if the act required more than just returning an object. "Ma'am," he began, the word catching slightly before settling. "I apologize for the misunderstanding." It was not loud. It was not dramatic. But it carried weight. Evelyn accepted the wallet with the same calm she had held from the beginning, her fingers brushing lightly against his as she took it, her expression unchanged except for the faintest softening around her eyes. "It is all right," she said quietly, not dismissing the moment, but not holding on to it either, her voice carrying a kind of grace that made the apology feel both necessary and already forgiven. Marcus watched the exchange without interruption, his gaze steady, not confrontational, not approving, simply present, and then he spoke again, his tone measured, thoughtful. "Respect should not depend on who arrives," he said, the words calm but precise, landing with more weight than volume ever could. Reeves lowered his eyes briefly, the meaning clear, the truth undeniable, and for a moment, he did not respond. The crowd behind them remained silent, their attention still fixed, but the tension that had held everything together had shifted into something else, something quieter, something reflective. The sunlight faded further, casting a soft amber glow across the scene, and the edges of the moment softened, no longer sharp with uncertainty, but grounded in something more human, more real, as the understanding settled into place without needing anything more. The moment did not end with a sudden release. It softened, slowly, like tension unwinding from something that had been held too tightly for too long, and the street seemed to breathe again as the weight of misunderstanding lifted without noise. Officer Reeves stepped back half a pace, not retreating, but allowing space to return, his posture no longer rigid, his presence quieter, more aware, as if the lines he had drawn earlier had dissolved into something less certain, something more human. He adjusted his stance, glancing briefly at the crowd before lowering his gaze again, the reflection of the fading sunlight catching along the edge of his badge, no longer sharp, but muted. Evelyn Carter slipped the wallet gently back into her coat pocket, her movements unhurried, her composure unchanged, as though the moment had passed through her without leaving anything behind that needed to be carried. Marcus remained beside her, the grocery bag resting securely in his hand, the faint outline of bread and small necessities pressing softly through the plastic, grounding everything in the simple reality of why they had come there in the first place. The air felt cooler now, the warmth of the day giving way to evening, and a light breeze moved through the street, brushing past coats and carrying with it the distant hum of life continuing beyond this small, quiet intersection of people and perception. No one in the crowd spoke. One by one, phones lowered, shoulders shifted, and the silent audience began to dissolve, each person stepping away with something they could not quite name but would not easily forget. Reeves nodded once, a small gesture, not formal, not rehearsed, but real, and then he turned, walking back toward his patrol car with measured steps, the sound of his boots against the pavement steady, subdued, as if even that sound understood it no longer needed to command attention. Evelyn watched him go for a brief second, not with judgment, not with relief, but with a quiet acceptance that did not need to hold on to what had just happened. Then she turned slightly toward Marcus, her expression soft, her eyes reflecting the last light of the evening, and he met her gaze with the same calm presence he had carried into the moment, a silent reassurance that needed no words. He adjusted the grocery bag in his hand and opened the car door for her, the gesture simple, familiar, rooted in something far deeper than the moment they had just stepped through. She moved toward the car slowly, her steps steady, and as she settled into the seat, the fabric of her coat brushed softly against the door frame, a small, ordinary sound that felt like a return to something real. Marcus closed the door gently and walked around to the driver's side, the street now nearly empty, the echoes of what had happened fading into the quiet rhythm of the evening. The engine started with a low, steady hum, and as the car pulled away from the curb, the last light of the sun stretched across the pavement, catching briefly on the place where they had stood, before slipping away into shadow. Nothing more was said. Nothing more was needed. The street returned to stillness, but something within it had shifted, something unseen yet lasting, carried not in noise or memory, but in the quiet understanding that remained long after the moment itself had passed.